Hey, welcome back to The Craft, where we explore what we're learning about the creative process. I'm Colby, and I'm here with my friend Carter. And today we're talking about being an artist and keeping your day job.
Yeah, so the question today is around the day job, and the odds are if you're becoming more and more serious about your craft, you'll probably at some point ask yourself, could I do this full time? And then kind of the other question, should I do it full time? And so one of the questions that we're thinking about today is this line between a hobbyist and a professional. And at first glance, this appears like a clear line. If you make money, you're professional. If you're doing it just as a hobby, right, your craft is a hobby. But to what degree is the craft defined by getting paid? And so our overarching question is, can you be a real artist, scare quotes there, and keep your day job? So a couple of different things on the table. Colby, what are your initial thoughts with this question? I know I've kind of got my definite answer here, but yeah, what are your thoughts?
Whew. Can you be a real artist and keep your day job? That's a good question. I mean, that might be the title of the podcast right there. Um, I think that the answer is yes. Just that's where I'm at. But I think that there's a lot that you need to talk through because I don't know. There's definitely a sense in me that struggles with feeling like unless I'm making a lot of money on my art, or until I make a lot of money on my art, I'm not there yet. Kind of chasing that goal of like monetizing my work or having a certain number of listeners or whatever. So there's kind of two things in here. I think there's one, like monetizing your work, and then there's two, just like recognition for your work, like whether that's like listens or how many people read your work or views on a video, whatever the metric is. Feels like there's like just money and notoriety, the kind of two categories. And really, obviously, like everyone would be like, oh, you don't have to have those things to be doing good work. But nonetheless, like the way that we think naturally is just like geared towards wanting to make money, wanting to be known. And so I think that's why this is going to be an interesting conversation to just like talk about why that is.
Yeah, I think you're right on there. And I think it's harder probably in your industry than it is in mine. I feel like the tendency for academics or writers is to look at the decade long perspective. Like, I don't know, there's a big narrative of, right, Moby Dick is not recognized till like 50 years after it's published. It might even be more, so don't quote me on that. But that's typically the example everyone goes to. And it's true, right? There are a lot of artists that are not recognized in their time, thinking Van Gogh, you can do a huge list of this. So I think in one case, we're quick to say, okay, you don't get recognition, you don't get paid. All right, that's fine, right? Doesn't mean that you can't do great art. There's tons of different examples. But at the same time, if you're not getting any recognition, you always kind of end up asking yourself, well, is it not any good? Like, I feel like that's a question. And I feel like, I don't know, at least in the music industry, it seems like listens and engagement is probably really important, like as a barometer of what you're making. Do you think, I don't know, do you think there's a difference like between mediums here of like if you're writing something, are you getting engagement versus if you're creating a song or an album? Do you think the metrics kind of are different here or look different across genres? What do you think?
I'm actually going to say I might disagree because I think I definitely agree. On the one hand, there seems to be a tendency with writers to have that perspective like that. You would know that better than I believe that's true. But I'd say it's probably, it's, yeah, I think in music too, there's enough examples, I'll just say, about there's enough examples of music that's really stood the test of time versus music that's been, like you have the concept of a one hit wonder in music, which is like someone who makes one song, it blows up, and then they might make more music, but they're never known for anything else that they make. And so um, I think that there is a precedent in music for musicians and artists who have maybe they didn't have as much recognition when they were around or early in their careers, but then you like zoom out and see the whole picture of their life, and they, have a major impact, or their records go on to win awards, or just um or just consistently stay in vogue like for decades instead of just fading out. Like a lot of the songs that are on the radio right now will probably disappear within a couple years. They'll just be another 2020s song. You know what I mean? So, but really, I mean, you could also, I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on that too, from about like pop music, because, I like making pop kind of music. And there's kind of a question about pop where it's like, it's popular. So is it, um, so there's a need to like make it catchy and make it 3 minutes and 30 seconds and like follow some formulas. And so does that degrade or lower the quality of the art? I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on like pop art.
Dude, okay, so I love this question because I feel like I can just upfront acknowledge that any conversation, this is a disclaimer about music, I'm totally out of my lane and I'll unapologetically like just wheel and deal. So if I say some like definite claim, I knowingly say this as not an expert. Um, so that'll be my preface. If it comes up again, I'll do it again, a different episode. But yeah, pop's really interesting because I think you've got like bubblegum chewy pop that you just enjoy. It's juicy fruit. It lasts like 25 seconds. And then it's like, okay, this is like a piece of eraser in my mouth. And then you've got pop, like I'm thinking of Michael Jackson, that's still like, it's got this enduring quality to it. People still like play Billie Jean. Like it's got some sort of like that lasting quality that you're talking to. And so I wonder, the question for me is, what are those kind of characteristics about certain pop songs that give it the bubblegum effect or the lasting effect? And I think that, I mean, that's a whole, I mean, we're way off topic here in a bit, but I think it's worth thinking about because
Hmm.
I've always been driven by this idea of there is this metric of lasting quality to art. And even in reading Hume lately in a class, one of the big components of how he measured, whether or not something was beautiful or whatever aesthetic quality they were talking about, aesthetic value, was that it lasts the test of time, that multiple true critics across history have acknowledged there's value there. Now, there's all sorts of ways to disagree with that and qualify that and say, okay, some things are really popular for 200 years and then they dropped. Is that is that aesthetically valuable? So there's a lot of different ways to qualify it. But I do think, like, if you're not making art that's gonna last, I maybe people are gonna disagree with this, but I feel like it's just not as meaningful to me. If I'm making something that I don't know, if I'm making something ephemeral that's just gonna get kind of another noise, not something that I say, okay, I want this to last, like it's got some sort of enduring quality to it. I, I'm at least I'm not as interested in that. But I could hear the counter argument with that of being like, yeah, some things are just made. A cup of coffee is made not to last; it's to be enjoyed. So if you made some sort of some things have that ephemeral nature to them that is part of enjoying them. But
Yeah.
for art, I think the emphasis of, for me, the value here is on the lasting duration.
Okay. So let me rope this back into the main topic then and
Do
say,
it.
can you make lasting art while you still have a day job? And kind of maybe that's like obvious. Maybe people have a really strong reaction, yes or no. I don't know. But can we dig into that a little more and some of those implications?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things I was thinking about when just working through this was this idea of the hobbyist and the professional. And I think that's a binary that gets thrown around a lot. That's, if you just look at examples, and we've got a whole list of examples that we did in kind of preparation for this. Colby, you have a ton of stuff listed, and I did a little poking around today. No one really follows that. You either have artists who are like working day jobs until they get the big break, but you also have a lot of great lasting influence artists that continue working a day job. And so it's strange to think you're either a professional or it's just your hobby. Because here, right at the craft, here at the craft, uh, your craft is not a hobby. Like there's something different with a craft than a hobby. Like I wouldn't call music a hobby for you, right? What do you think? What do you think about the word kind of hobby? How does that play into this?
Mm. I mean, I guess a hobby is something that you do for fun, and it's supposed to be done for the sake of doing it. It's not for the sake of money or, uh, you know what I mean? Like any other, it's really just to find joy, to rest, to recover, to do something with your hands or your mind, whatever. So I think that's what a hobby is. And really, so you could have, so you could say on the one hand, well, I'm not making money from uh, doing music. Well, I make a little bit of money, but like I'm not making enough money on music uh, to really step out and do music full time or something. And I could say, okay, so it's just I do this for fun, or maybe it's a. Sorry, I'm kind of struggling to get a full sentence out here. Let me start over. Um, I think a hobby is something you do for free, pretty much, and for fun. Then you have like the side hustle idea, which is like trying to make a little extra money on top of your main work. And so you're taking something you love maybe and you're turning it into a business. And then you have like the goal, kind of the dream, I think, that is like you have your side business and then you work hard enough, you're working in the evenings, and then all of a sudden it blows up. You've got enough work, you can quit your day job, you can go full time and you can be a real artist. That seems to be kind of, at least for me, kind of what I can want sometimes is like, oh, maybe something happens, things work out, and I am all of a sudden full time in this music thing and I don't have to do other work now and I can do what I love, quote unquote, for a living. And so you have this journey from here's what I love, which is my hobby, to can I make what I love a day job? And this is kind of what sparked the interest for me to do this conversation today was listening to Austin Kleon, from the author of Steal Like an Artist, talk about this very thing on the Future podcast. He talked about how he hates the word side hustle. I know this is a long section, but let me finish this final
Dude,
thought.
keep it going. No.
Um, but he talked about how he hates the word side hustle because he said poetry is not a side hustle to me. He's like, I do poetry. I write poetry to like breathe, to like survive, to like not hate my life and go crazy. And I thought that was interesting because I was like, oh, okay. So I don't have a strong opinion. I'm not bothered by the word side hustle, but I hear his point. Like, uh, you don't have to necessarily turn your hobby or the thing you love. Let's remove the word hobby for a second and say something you love. You don't have to turn something you love into a money maker just because you can. You can do it for the sake of loving that thing. Maybe it is a hobby. I don't know if that's the right word or if there's a category for something that you love and is free, but it's not a hobby. I don't really know, but
See,
uh,
that's
it's
the
a craft,
interesting
maybe.
thing. Yeah. So to add a complication to this, it's like I would consider fly fishing for me a hobby. Like I
Okay.
really enjoy it. I recharge. It brings like a vitality. There's so many great things about fly fishing that I
Hmm.
love. That's a hobby that I don't look at like writing, working on a screenplay or writing poetry as a hobby.
Mm.
But it is something that I enjoy. It's something that I am, practicing and developing. But it's markedly different than a hobby, and it's not my main source of payment. Right? I don't know. To me, it's like there's some sort of middle ground that a craft occupies that it might ascend from a hobby into something where you get paid full time to do it, but it may not. I don't know.
Mm.
I just see this kind of, and what do you think about that distinction?
Hmm.
Like, is there anything that you think, okay, a hobby, maybe running or biking, like
Hmm.
a hobby, and then working on music? Like, there's some sort of different weight to it that it's just in a different category in my mind. What do you think?
Yeah,
Is it in a different category for you?
I think so. I mean, I think there's like, uh, there's hobby. I'm trying to think of what hobbies I kind of enjoy that I would put in a different category. I do bike. I do run. I mean, like a hobby that I hardly ever pick up, but is fun is like longboarding, you know? Like that's truly something I could say is a hobby because I have a longboard, I can longboard, but I'm not the best at it. I'm also not concerned about how bad I am at it. Like it just there's no like comparison or like researching the best longboarders and trying to learn the craft of long, you know, it's like I'm just like trying to it's easier than walking. It's fun. I can go out to a park and I can cruise and I can put in my AirPods and listen to some music. It's fun. Like it's there's not really a goal with it, I guess. Maybe that's kind of what I think of with a
Nice.
hobby is like there's not a goal. There's just doing this thing. I'm biking. Um I think you could have a hobby and have goals. Like I think you could be like my hobby is running, but I
Yeah.
want to be a better runner. But I think what we're
Mm.
getting at is like feeling a calling towards something almost like something that keeps happening like you no matter what like even if I've just been wrestling recently with this idea of making money in music and been thinking like you know maybe there's better ways for me to make extra money because at the end of the day even if I made no money I know I will come back to this thing called music making like I know I'll come back to making more beats even if no one wants to work with me and I was just by myself I think I would still want to sit down and make something and that is kind of the drive that I feel like uh, is under the surface of what we're talking about.
Dude, I love that. I think that's I think that's so right on. And so to tie this into our conversation about the day job too, regardless of whether or not you're making money from your work, I think that that calling, that whatever that thing is that compels you to do this, and that it's yes, it's got a goal, it's got a development, it's got this kind of internal necessity that, regardless of whether you're making money, is possible. And I think that kind of gets to where we would both say, yeah, absolutely, you could have a day job and pursue your craft. Wallace Stevens, a major poet in the 20th century, he worked like his whole life at a corporate company while he wrote poetry. Turned down a job at Harvard after he won the Pulitzer to continue working. And now he was making a fat check at this company. He was like a vice president. Uh, but it just blows up the idea that his craft was something that happened alongside this kind of business pursuit. And so maybe that's I don't know, maybe that's one way that we could approach this whole question is there's something about the craft that's different than a hobby and it's different than what you're doing to get a paycheck. Now it could be a something that gets you a paycheck, I think, but I don't think it could be a hobby. I don't know. I might be in the weeds here, but do you think
Yeah.
there's anything valuable in that? Like, there's something that sets apart the craft that, regardless of whether you're making money, there's like this subterranean calling, compulsion, um, something there that's going to be there regardless of not or not.
Well, I guess one thing I would say is that I think you could probably pursue something as a craft, even if you don't feel a calling to it. So maybe that complicates things a little bit more. But if I mean, for example, I've some interest in cooking. I enjoy cooking and I'd like to get better at it. And I could see myself over a progression of many years, just like working on my skills, learning how different cutting techniques, like, I don't know, just trying to grow a real skill there. Um, and wanting to grow in that craft. Like, I don't think that I have to say, like, I'm a musician and then box myself into being just this one thing. Cause I think a lot of the artists
Oof.
that we'll look at who may have a day job and also do poetry and also write a book, they may also make a movie. They may also sell clothes. Like um, maybe there's just something about being an artist. You know what I mean? And I don't want to say like it's like you're an artist or you're not, and there's this like um, exclusive group or something. But like more so just the idea of maybe you just enjoy making things and being creative, and so there could be more than one avenue. Is all I want to say about like there's more than one way that you might want to be creative and pursue a craft. Um,
I totally agree. I think that's a helpful complication about things. Like there are like if we wanted to get like really meticulous, like there are sub crafts that you might work on.
yeah.
But to kind of bring back the binary, I think oftentimes it's thought about that you either have a hobby and then what you do for real, like your professional career.
Hmm.
And I think it's easy to get trapped in that where, oh, writing or making music is a hobby. Well, it's like it's not a hobby. Like there's something more like lasting to it. Um, I don't know. That was the kind of the vein that I was trying to tap into.
Okay, so I hear what you're saying. You're saying like, um, it's really the idea of if I'm, making music right now, but I'm independent and I'm just like, in other words, I'm just doing it by myself. But let's compare that to me working with a label, like, um, if I'm working with a label, there's a validation like Capitol Records or whatever. This label has said that this is an artist worth putting money on the table for. And they're backing me. And there's like, oh, he's a professional now because he works at a
Yes,
professional label. And then you
exactly.
look at, let's flip it and let's say I do marketing at my day job. So let's flip it and say, what if I was doing freelance marketing and I didn't have a company, quote unquote, backing me, but I was my own company, versus, oh, Colby does marketing at Resound. It's like, well, there's this backing of a company that says you're a professional marketer now versus being a professional marketer, but I'm independent, I'm a freelancer, like, so there's almost this, whenever the company backs you or you have a certain like status attached to it, then you can be like, professionally, I do this, and it kind of validates it. Uh, And if you tell someone like, yeah, I'm working on a screenplay, it's like, oh, okay, well, you're
Oh,
not a
that's nice.
director, so it sounds lame.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
but then you pass over the fact that there have been screenplays written by people before they broke into that industry, people who taught themselves or people who, had a normal day job, and that doesn't mean that they couldn't write a screenplay. Like, so, um,
That's exactly the
I don't
distinction
know.
that I wanted to. I think you articulated that really well. That regardless, like we've got this conception where if you get paid, you're legitimate. You're a real
Yeah,
artist if you get
right.
paid. If not, it's a hobby. And I think that's the thing that I'm just like, no, that's just not true.
Yeah.
Eh, We can't gauge. It's just a really bad way to gauge any sort of value by how much it gets paid or like how it can get monetized. Because there's plenty of crappy things that get monetized. I mean, I think social media, right? There's tons of just worthless content that gets a ton of engagement. And so in
Hmm.
the same way, there's tons of things that are not admirable that get monetized.
Okay, so I kind of want to share this like scene from a show I've been watching just because it's kind of perfectly tied to this.
Do it.
I don't know if I want to cut this later or not, but I'm watching this show Silicon Valley. It's very funny. It's about starting a startup in Silicon Valley, and there's a scene where the founder of Hooli, which is like a massive company, kind of a big corporation, um, he's like talks about how he went soul searching and went on this trip, and he said, I saw all the wonders of the world. I saw the pyramid. What is it? The Pyramid of Giza, and he lists a couple other things, and he says they all collectively get about 12,000 visits per year, some small number. And he's like, and I realized that the Hooli app has 1.5 million users visit it every day. And then I realized I have built something better than the greatest wonders in the world, and I'm the best version of myself. And that was like the result of his quest was like, I'm
Oh,
already the best version of myself. And it was obviously this whole like, it's a super sarcastic show,
satire. Yeah.
but it's like, in a way, that's kind of like, it's a joke, but we all sort of do buy into this like 1.5 million views. Oh, that's legitimate. 1,500 views, illegitimate. But
Exactly.
you look at
Exactly.
you could be looking at a piece of crap art that gets 1.5 million and then a beautiful classic painting that gets 1,500. And it's like there's a lot of factors at play, but not every metric is the correct proxy to value. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I think that's yeah, I mean, it sounds very basic. But like even with like NFTs and stuff, you can buy a $300,000 NFT, but if you bought a Rembrandt and then you said they're worth the same, are they? And then I know there's some there's somebody out there being like, "Oh, the NFT is worth more than the Rembrandt." Like
That's
we'll take, we'll take you. I'll take you on later. No, it's not. Fight me on that one.
Well, I guess the question is going to be, how much is the Rembrandt worth in another 20 years, and how much is the NFT worth? That's going to kind of be the big question, right?
Yeah,
Like,
but then it's like that's the wrong metric. Like it's just like that's the
yeah,
wrong game to play. It's like that's
yeah,
not the question. And I guess that's what I'm trying to tie into our conversation about art. If you're gauging your art by how much money you make or how much engagement, I think it's the wrong metric most of the time. Now, of course, some great art gets great engagement. And this might, tie it back into pop music. Some pop music is popular and it's great. It's like just because it's popular doesn't discredit it. And just because you make
sure,
money on it doesn't discredit it.
100%.
But it's kind of works just because you make money doesn't mean it's good. I don't know. That's the kind of, I feel like, yeah, you could make money on it and it can be great. But just because you make money doesn't mean it's great. That's the kind of aphoristic style, I think,
Yeah,
what I'm thinking about.
I think that's good. I think that's a good thought. So I mean, we've really solved it. So I think the next logical thing is like, how do you take this mindset of like, okay, I can actually make something meaningful, even if I don't make a lot of money off of it, even if it doesn't go viral, and even if I still have a day job. So now how do I keep going? Like, seriously, like, you could personalize this to me if you want. Like, how do I keep going? Because I do love my day job. And in a way, there's a, like, I love the craft of marketing. So there's a desire for me to invest in the craft of marketing and grow there. So that's kind of a different conversation. But uh, for music, which is not right now my day job, like, there's a desire for that to go full time in the future, or for me to own a business in the future. Like, that's a desire on me in my heart. But how can I think about this like right now as I have a day job? Anything practical?
Dude, that's good. So thinking about application here, to kind of sum up a couple of thoughts, and correct me if you disagree here. Right, there are benefits of going full time in a craft. You get to devote more time to the craft, right? There are obviously benefits here, but there are also challenges of you get in the position maybe that you're trying to produce, and you've got to get product, and you've got to get output, and you've got to get things finished. I'm thinking about like Jack London talks about how he had to write stuff to sell because he had to make money. Like he was a full-time writer, but he had to just crank stuff out, and how he even approached that of, I'm just writing what the editors want. And that can kind of sink in too. So I think I think there are pros and cons to oversimplify it in that way. But if we're thinking about application, I love the quote that you sent me earlier this week. Maybe you can read that about finding those times during the day to work, because although you don't need to be at it full time, you do have to be at it sometime. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's the thing. Like you still have to give it some time, and you have to carve out places within the rhythms of your life that you're going to devote to the craft. And so I think the danger of, if you got the day job, is that maybe you neglect the craft, and maybe the danger of, if it's your full time, maybe you neglect the craft and you're focused on
Mm-hmm.
something else. So I think in both ways there's the potential to be focused on something other than working on what you're trying to work on. And obviously there are tons of things that we need to be concerned about, but in regards to working on a discipline, whether or not you've got a day job or you're full time, there's still, in either case, I think you can get disoriented.
Yeah, I think that's good. So can I take us on a quick tangent before we do this quote of the week?
Yeah, let's do it.
Because I wrote down, we both did some research on examples of artists, and artists who had a day job and are still, like, had a legacy, are well known. Which I guess goes a bit against it's not against what we said, but it's kind of like, these people are well known, so I'm still using that as a proxy, which is fine. But yeah, I just think whenever I listen to the other podcast from Austin Kleon, I kind of wanted to hear some examples, of like, who are his favorite artists who had day jobs. because that really interested me. So I did a little digging, did some research. Some of these came from Austin Kleon. He has a blog about it. And we can link these things in the show notes in the description. And there was a couple blogs I found as well that were helpful, but really I just want to go through a short list of some of these artists, and we can talk about kind of what sticks out to you before we wrap here. So the first example is Austin Kleon. He talked about in his podcast, he just talked about this, how he would work on his day job, work on his art, his writing before his day job in order to kind of like get that creativity out of his system before he got to work. And the next big one that was really interesting was Scott Adams. So I was reading the book Rest by Alex Sujong Kim Pang. And I'm not sure if I pronounced that perfect, but it's a really interesting book. And he talks about how Scott Adams, the author of the Dilbert comic strips, he would wake up at 4 a.m. every day to write before his day job. And if you don't know, the Dilbert comic strips, they're like, I think they're about like office humor, pretty much like making fun of corporate life, which is interesting. So he woke up every day, 4 a.m. He would write a little bit before work. And he said, quote, "That's why I rarely drew background scenes. I literally didn't have the time." And it's run for 30 years. They've made a movie out of it. They've made...
they made a movie? That's awesome.
I don't know if it's from the comics or if it's like about the author. But there's like a movie spinoff. There's been a book written. There's all of these different things. It's 100% commercially successful. But on top of that, it's just like he's been doing it for 30 years. And I think he still does a lot of his work in the early mornings. And so that was pretty inspirational, pretty interesting to me. And he did eventually go full-time with it, but he started it as a side project, as something outside of work. Let's see. Jack London, we've already mentioned him. He was, you know way more about him than I do, but from what I saw, he was an oyster pirate in San Francisco. And
yeah, dude, he was like 13 years old stealing oysters. And then when he was like 17, he was a seal hunter in Japan. And then when he was like 19, he was in the Klondike. And then he was like, screw all this manual labor. I'm just going to write. But all that time that he was working, I mean, it's a huge inspiration for all of his work. And so you could totally see how that his day job, basically this manual labor that he did, was really important for him because it laid the foundation for most of his creative fiction later in his life. But he definitely went full time, and he was, like I mentioned before, he saw some challenges with that too. But yeah, he had a healthy amount of physical labor before he went full time.
Well, I think that's something I wish we'd spent more time talking about, like the benefits of it and the pros and cons, because I think that seems to be a really big pro of having a day job is you have a steady income. 2, you have this space where you can be getting excited about doing creative work, where you're like, oh, I can't work on this right now, but I can't wait till I have some free time. Like I always found when I was a student in college, I would be so excited about doing music because it was like, I don't have time to do music. So it's like, you want the thing you cannot have, and something about that. But then on top of that, with Jack London, like he has these life experiences that he can draw from for his stories. And I think that's another huge piece is like you're actually living your life,
for sure,
doing stuff, having interactions with people,
for sure.
And then you can write songs about that, or you can write stories about that,
exactly,
and draw from that inspiration. Next, we got Agatha Christie, who wrote a lot of different murder mysteries, not true crime. Yeah, murder. I don't know what the genre would be. Is it just like...
Yeah, it's like crime mysteries.
Mystery. That's the yes.
She's the
mystery.
trailblazer in the mystery genre.
And I've only read one book from her, and I've seen the movie that was based off that book about what was it called? It was about the train.
Murder on the Orient Express, I think.
Yes, which was really good. And she was a pharmacist. Harper Lee, author of To Kill a Mockingbird. She was an American writer. She was an airline ticket inspector. William Faulkner was a postmaster. And I think during that time wrote some poems later collected as The Marble Faun. Vivian Meyer, who isn't as popular but very well known in the photography space. I know some of my friends definitely were actually introduced me to her work. She was a street photographer. Her works didn't become famous until after her lifetime, I believe, or towards the end of her lifetime. And she worked as a nanny. Jackson Pollock, contemporary artist, obviously. There's another conversation just about his work because it's so crazy. But he was a babysitter, which is interesting.
I bet he made a mess.
I actually recently saw in the Chicago Institute of Art, saw Jackson Pollock, which was pretty cool.
Dude, you saw some awesome artwork.
Saw Picasso.
Colby sent me some gems from that trip.
Yeah, there's some good stuff there. But anyways, it was definitely, I think it was interesting for me to find this list of people, and hopefully that inspires some of these people, inspire you listeners, because I feel like there's like most of these people are writers, I guess almost all of them except for the photographer and the painter. But I think that there's probably more examples across all the mediums that we could find.
Yeah, and one more thing I'll add to this that's really neat, I think. A lot of people know T.S. Eliot worked in a bank, but there was something I came across where Aldous Huxley visited him and said he was the most bank clerky of all the bank clerks. And basically that he did his job really, really well. And I thought that was awesome. So while he's composing some of the, most popular critically acclaimed poetry of the century, he's also doing a really good job as a bank clerk. And I just love that. And so I think going back to those benefits, you can also crush the day job and really, pursue excellence in that while you're doing your craft. You're not just checking in to mindlessly get your paycheck, which, I don't know. It was something I was really encouraged. I'm like, I love that T.S. Eliot was a good bank clerk. Like that fires me up.
Yeah, he wasn't like writing poetry under the countertop, like ignoring customers, like just trying to get over the workday, complaining. Like he was doing a good job. I think that's beautiful. I think that's great. I really like that. And man, that kind of sparks another conversation for another day, which is just like this whole conversation about, it's almost like a bunch of myth busting. And we're not breaking any new ground here. We're really repeating things, but it's like, you don't have to be like the fact that you're still in your 20s is an interesting thing to talk about. What am I trying to say? The average age, I saw this from a newsletter from Nathaniel Drew. There's a study that shows the average age of authors when they write a bestseller is 48.
Boom.
And that's just like an episode by itself, because we need to talk about that. Like maybe our best work isn't going to be in our 20s. Maybe it's going to be in our 50s or 60s. Because
dude, I'm hoping my best work is like 75, like when I can actually write something because I've actually read some stuff.
It feels like this definitely feels different between writing and music, because I don't think of authors as like necessarily young people. I think like the older you are as an author, the more I trust you, but the younger you are as an artist, the more I'm interested in you. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah, I hear that,
because like you want artists. I've heard artists talk a lot about like, there's a window of time in your artistic life where you can like be famous, where you can make the money, where you can be relevant basically. And then you kind of just get older. And then there's new people that come in the labels, and it's like, it really is a game of younger artists. Like, and that's more specific to like being popular in pop music and things. But like, you don't think about Bob Dylan as fresh or new or anything. I mean, even like someone like, I don't know, I guess, but he's an incredible artist,
and he did stuff when he was young.
poet.
And so, I mean,
yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think, and I'll say that too. I mean, Keats is super young when he was writing, and yeah, you can definitely do great work at a young age. At least that's what we're hoping. But there is a long game, and it comes back to the idea of the craft of the long game.
For sure. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we do another episode on that someday.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, well, let me knock out this quote of the day real quickly. So this quote of the day comes from Austin Kleon. We've talked a lot about him in this episode, but it feels appropriate since he inspired the content. Author of Steal Like an Artist, Highly recommend checking out his website and everything. He said, "This is what I recommend. Get up early and work for 2 hours on the one thing you really care about. Then, when you're done, go to your job. When you get there, your boss can't take the thing you really care about away from you because you already did it. And you'll know you get to do it tomorrow morning as long as you make it through today." I really like that quote. I think it just summarizes what we've already talked about today, honestly.
Yeah, I think it
Do you have
speaks
any
for
thoughts?
itself. I think it speaks for itself, and yeah, make some time, and work on the craft, regardless of whether or not it's full time or not. You're going to need time, and so find that time and work it into whatever rhythm that you're in.
Awesome. Well, this is a good episode, man. We're at 40 minutes. So I feel like this is a good time to wrap it up. Thank you all
Perfect,
for
dude.
listening. We'll see you on the next one. And also, I will say one last housekeeping note is we do have a new email set up. It's heycraftpodcast@gmail.com. And so if you have any questions or feedback, just ways we can make the show better, topics you want us to talk about, or your own thoughts about whether you should have a day job or if you need to be a full-time artist to be a real artist, let us know.
The door is wide open. Anything you want to send us, pretty much, send us.
That's right. So send us a message and we'll see you in the next episode. Hey, thanks for listening to The Craft with Carter and Colby, where we share what we're learning about the creative process. If you're a writer, music producer, marketer, filmmaker, photographer, or you just love creativity, then this show is for you. Our cover art was designed by Elizabeth Newell. You can learn more about her work at elizabethnewelldesign.com. That's Elizabeth, Newell design.com. And you can follow her on Instagram at ElizabethIsADesigner. If you like the show, there's 3 things you can do to help us out. First, subscribe so you learn when we post new episodes. Second, send the link to one of your friends who you think would enjoy the show. Really, word of mouth is going to be the number one way we grow the show in any way. And 3, if you have a topic you want us to cover or feedback about how we can improve the show or comments on what we've said, you can respond to heycraftpodcast@gmail.com, heycraft podcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.